The city shimmered with gold and decay, its streets thick with the scent of incense and corruption. In the heart of the Vatican, Rodrigo Borgia, now Pope Alexander VI, surveyed his domain with a predator's gaze. The papal tiara weighed heavy on his brow, but it was a burden he bore with relish. For years he had schemed, bribed, and clawed his way to the throne of Saint Peter, and now, at last, the Holy See was his. The Borgias were not noble by birth, but they were ruthless by nature. Rodrigo's rise had been fueled by a network of alliances sealed with Spanish gold and whispered promises. Cardinals who opposed him found their influence waning or their lives cut short. The papal court, once a bastion of piety, had become a den of vice where fortunes were won and lost over games of chance and the favors of courtesans. At the center of it all stood Lucrezia, Rodrigo's daughter, a vision of golden hair and porcelain beauty. Just 16, she was already a prize in her father's grand designs. Her laughter echoed through the Vatican's gilded halls, but behind her smile lay the sharp mind of a player in a game she had not chosen. Beside her loomed Cesare, her brother, a young cardinal with the cold eyes of a wolf and ambitions that outstripped even their father's. The whispers began almost immediately. Rome was a city that thrived on scandal, and the Borgias provided ample fodder. Rodrigo's mistresses paraded openly. Their bastard children were raised within the Vatican's walls. Cesare's violent reputation grew with each enemy who vanished in the night. And Lucrezia, sweet, innocent Lucrezia, was caught in the crossfire of rumor and insinuation. The papal court was a stage, and every player knew their lines, but the script was written in blood. Outside the Vatican's walls, the city scene, the people murmured of poison in the wine, of daggers in the dark. The Borgia's enemies, the Della Roveres, the Sforzas, circled like vultures, their pamphlets and broadsheets dripping with venom. Rome had seen corruption before, but never so brazen, so personal. And so, beneath the frescoed ceilings of the Apostolic Palace, the seeds of a darker legend took root. The whispers slithered through the shadows. What manner of family was this? What sins lay hidden behind closed doors? The stage was set, the players were ready, and the world would never forget the name Borgia. The first rumors were like smoke, thin, insubstantial, but impossible to ignore. They curled through the taverns of Rome, slipped between the lips of courtiers in the Vatican's antechambers, and sopped into the ink of anonymous pamphlets left in the piazzas at dawn. The daughter shares the father's bed. The brother's gaze lingers too long. No one could say who spoke the words first, but they spread like plague through the city. The Borgia's enemies needed no proof, only scandal, only something vile enough to erode the family's grip on power. And what was more evil than incest? The pamphlets appeared overnight, crude woodcuts depicting twisted embraces, their figures just vague enough to avoid outright libel, but unmistakable in their intent. Rodrigo's jowled face, Cesare's sharp features, Lucrezia's flowing hair, all rendered in grotesque caricature. The text was worse, verses dripping with innuendo, prayers twisted into obscenity. "O Holy Father, who art in bed, unhallowed be thy name." Lucrezia, walking through the Vatican gardens with her ladies, would find them falling silent as she approached, their eyes darting away. Even the servants whispered behind their hands. She was no fool, she knew what they said, but to acknowledge it would be to give the rumors power. Cesare, ever the wolf, reacted differently. He cornered a printer in the dead of night, his dagger pressing into the man's throat until he named his patron, a Sforza lackey paid to distribute the filth. The printer's body was found floating in the Tiber the next morning, his tongue cut out. The message was clear, but the damage was done. Scandal, once unleashed, could not so easily be silenced. Rodrigo, for his part, dismissed it all with a wave of his ringed hand. "Let the dogs bark," he told Lucrezia, his voice thick with wine. "They envy what they cannot have." But his nonchalance only fueled the speculations. Why would a pope, God's representative on earth, not rage against such slander, unless the rumors had grown teeth? At a banquet hosted by Cardinal Orsini, a rival faction, a poet recited verses laden with double meaning, his eyes flickering toward Lucrezia as he spoke of flowers plucked too soon. The room erupted in stifled laughter. Lucrezia, her cheeks burning, kept her chin high, but later, in the privacy of her chambers, she shattered a vase against the wall. Cesare found her there, kneeling among the shards. They will pay, he promised, his voice a blade unsheathed. But payment was not enough. The whispers had taken root, and in the shadows of Renaissance Rome, where truth and lies were currency, the most dangerous stories were the ones people wanted to believe. Incest was the unforgivable sin, the violation of nature, the corruption of bloodlines, the unraveling of divine order. In a world where the church preached purity and the sanctity of the family, no accusation carried more weight. For the Borgia's enemies, that made it the perfect weapon. Rome had long tolerated the vices of its rulers, bribery, murder, even the open flaunting of mistresses. But incest was different. It was a sin so monstrous it could not be spoken aloud in polite company, yet so tantalizing it spread like wildfire in the dark. The Borgias were already reviled for their Spanish blood, their insatiable greed, their brazen nepotism. But the whispers of incest transformed them from mere sinners into something far worse, abominations. And yet the irony was bitter. The Borgias were guilty, but not of that. Rodrigo had bought the papacy with chests of gold, securing votes from cardinals whose piety dissolved at the sight of Spanish coin. Cesare had ordered assassinations with the casual cruelty of a man who believed himself above earthly justice. Lucrezia's marriages were brokered like trade agreements, her body a bargaining chip in her father's endless games of power. These were sins Rome could understand, perhaps even expect. But they were not enough to destroy the family, not like this rumor could. The pamphlets grew bolder. One, slipped under the door of a Venetian ambassador, depicted Lucrezia as a modern-day Phryne, her arms entwined with both father and brother. Another, read aloud in the taverns of Trastevere, spun a tale of a papal key that unlocked more than heaven's gates. The Borgia's enemies needed no proof, only the seed of doubt, watered by the public's appetite for scandal. Even the church's own teachings fed the flames. Sermons on morality, on the sins of Sodom, on the damnation that awaited those who defiled sacred bonds. All were twisted into veiled condemnations of the Borgias. A Florentine preacher, his voice trembling with righteous fury, spoke of a house where the serpent nests in the marriage bed. He did not name names, he did not need to. Lucrezia, trapped in the eye of the storm, became both villain and victim. To some, she was the seductress, the temptress who ensnared her own kin. To others, she was the pawn, the innocent corrupted by the men who should have protected her. The truth mattered less than the story, and the story was too delicious to resist. Cesare, ever the strategist, saw the danger. "They paint us as monsters," he snarled to his father, "because they cannot defeat us as rivals." Rodrigo, reclining in his chambers with a goblet of wine, only chuckled. Let them talk. Words are wind. But words, as Cesare knew, could topple empires. The Borgias' real sins, their bribes, their murders, their naked ambition, were mundane beside the myth taking shape. A myth that would outlive them all. For in the end, history remembers not what men do, but what others say they did. And Rome was already writing the Borgias' epitaph in ink stained with poison. Lucrezia Borgia was never merely a daughter. She was a key, a finely wrought golden key to the vaults of power her father, Alexander VI, sought to unlock. From the moment she could walk, she had been groomed for a singular purpose, to serve the Borgia dynasty. But was she a willing participant in her father's machinations? Or merely a pawn moved across the chessboard of Renaissance politics? The answer, like so much of her life, lay shrouded in the shadows of the Vatican. Rodrigo Borgia had never been a man to let sentiment interfere with ambition. His love for Lucrezia was real, of that there was little doubt, but it was a love tempered by calculation. She was his most valuable asset, a jewel to be bartered for alliances, lands, and influence. By the age of 13, she had already been betrothed twice, her hand promised to noblemen whose loyalty could be bought or whose territories could be absorbed into the Borgia web. The first marriage to Giovanni Sforza of Pesaro was a cold transaction. The Sforzas were a powerful Milanese family, and the union secured Alexander's northern interests. But when the political winds shifted, so too did Lucrezia's fate. The marriage was dissolved under murky circumstances, Giovanni fleeing Rome in terror, rumors swirling that the annulment hinged on claims of his impotence, or worse, that Alexander had fabricated the entire ordeal to free Lucrezia for a more advantageous match. "You will be a queen," her father had murmured to her when the scaffolding of marriage crumbled. his fingers brushing her cheek with deceptive tenderness. Not a countess, not a lord's wife, a queen. Lucrezia bowed her head, her voice steady. As you wish, Holy Father. But behind the obedient words, what did she truly feel? Some historians would later paint her as a passive ornament, her will bent entirely to her father's. Others would argue she was a keen player in the game, her sweetness a mask for a mind as sharp as any dagger. The truth, perhaps, lay somewhere in between. Her second marriage to Alfonso of Aragon, a prince of Naples, was another piece in Alexander's grand design. Naples was a jewel in the Mediterranean, and with Lucrezia as her future queen, the Borgias would command the south just as they ruled Rome. But this union too would end in blood. Alfonso wouldn't live to see his throne. His body was left broken in a Roman alley, his killers never named but widely suspected. It was these marriages, these abrupt, brutal shifts in her fate, that fed the darkest whispers. Why would a father so publicly parade his daughter through betrothals and annulments unless there was something unnatural in their bond? The pamphleteers sneered. What groom could satisfy a bride already claimed by her own kin? Lucrezia's ladies reported hearing her weep at night, but by dawn she was always composed, her face a serene mask as she attended Mass at her father's side. Was it resignation, complicity, or the steely resolve of a woman who understood that survival in the Borgia court meant playing the game better than anyone else? Alexander, for his part, seemed untroubled by the rumors. When a cardinal dared to allude to the scandal during a consistory meeting, the Pope's laughter boomed through the hall. Do you think I would share such a treasure with any man, even my own son? Thee is calculated, brazen enough to mock the accusation, yet laced with just enough ambiguity to unsettle. In the end, Lucrezia's value to her father was never in question. She was the perfect instrument, beautiful, intelligent, malleable when necessary, ruthless when required. Whether she embraced her role or merely endured it mattered little to Alexander. The Borgias did not deal in love, they dealt in power. And power, as Rome was learning, was a far more dangerous thing than desire. Cesare Borgia moved through Rome like a blade unsheathed, swift, silent, and deadly. Where his father ruled with gold and guile, Cesare preferred steel. His reputation was carved in blood, the cardinal who had cast aside his robes for armor, the Pope's son who commanded armies with the same ease he once recited scripture. But it was his relationship with Lucrezia that truly set tongues wagging. The siblings were inseparable. Cesare, ever the protector, hovered at Lucrezia's side, his presence a silent warning to anyone who might dare to harm or slight her. He escorted her to Mass, lingered at her banquets, and dismissed her suitors with a glance that promised violence. They are outsiders, their closeness was unnatural. To the Borgias, it was simply the way of their world. Lucrezia, for her part, seemed to bask in her brother's shadow. Where others saw menace, she saw devotion. No one understands him as I do, she once confided to a lady-in-waiting, her voice tinged with pride. He is not the monster they paint him to be. But Rome thought it knew better, or at least it wanted to. The rumors had begun years earlier when Lucrezia was still a girl, whispers that Cesare lingered too long in her chambers, that his kisses lingered on her cheek, that his gifts, jewels, silks, a dagger with a pearl handle, were more fitting for a lover than a brother. The truth, as ever, was murkier. Cesare was possessive, yes, but whether his love was fraternal or something darker, none could say for certain. Even history hesitates to draw the line. What was undeniable was Cesare's role in Lucrezia's scandals. When her first marriage to Giovanni Sforza crumbled, it was Cesare who delivered the annulment papers, and Cesare who was rumored to have threatened Giovanni's life if he refused to sign. When her second husband, Alfonso of Aragon, was found stabbed in an alley, it was Cesare's name that rose to the surface, like a corpse in the Tiber. He would kill for her, the courtiers murmured. But would he kill because of her? The question haunted Lucrezia's reputation. Did Cesare eliminate Alfonso out of political necessity or out of jealousy? The timing was damning. Alfonso had been young, handsome, beloved by Lucrezia in a way none of her previous suitors had been. Their marriage had been one of rare affection, a fleeting glimpse of happiness in the Borgia's cutthroat world. And then, abruptly, it ended in blood. Cesare never confessed, but he never denied it either. When pressed by a drunken nobleman at a banquet, he merely smiled, swirling his wine. A man who cannot keep what is his, he said, does not deserve to keep it. The nobleman did not speak again that night. Lucrezia's grief was public, her tears genuine. But within weeks, she was back at her father's side, her mourning clothes exchanged for silks, her face a mask of composure. Some said she hadn't forgiven Cesare. Others whispered she had known all along. The siblings' bond only deepened in the aftermath. Cesare, ever the strategist, ensured Lucrezia's next marriage would be to a man of his choosing, Alfonso d'Este, Duke of Ferrara, a match that would secure the Borgia's legacy in the north. And Lucrezia, ever the dutiful daughter, acquiesced. But Rome never forgot. The rumors festered, fed by Cesare's ruthless reputation and Lucrezia's enigmatic silence. Had they been partners in crime? Had their bond crossed the line from loyalty into something unspeakable? The truth, like so much of the Borgia story, was buried beneath layers of power, propaganda, and poison. But one thing was certain: in the shadow of Cesare Borgia, Lucrezia was both protected and imprisoned. A queen on a chessboard where every move was dictated by blood. And blood, as the Borgias knew better than anyone, was the one thing that was never washed clean. The banquet hall glittered like a gilded cage. Candles dripped wax onto silver platters, their flames casting long, flickering shadows across frescoed walls. Pope Alexander VI sat at the head of the table, his laughter booming as he raised a jeweled goblet to his lips. Around him, Rome's most powerful men feasted, cardinals in crimson silks, nobles with rings flashing, each unaware that they were players in a deadly game. This was the Borgia table, and not all who dined would leave alive. Lucrezia, draped in emerald velvet, presided over the feast with practiced grace. Her fingers brushed the stem of her wineglass, her lips curved in a smile that never reached her eyes. Beside her, Cesare lounged like a panther, his gaze sharp as it swept the room. The air was thick with the scent of roasted meats and spiced wine, and something else, something acrid beneath the perfume. The first to falter was Cardinal Orsini. His face, already flushed from wine, turned ashen. He clutched his stomach, his breath coming in ragged gasps. I feel unwell, he muttered, but his words were lost in the din of laughter. By the time his body hit the floor, convulsing, the servants were already moving forward, not to help, but to discreetly drag him away. The music played on. One by one, others began to sway, a young lord wretched into his plate. A bishop clawed at his throat, his eyes bulging. The poison worked swiftly, a silent assassin in the wine, the bread, the sugared fruits. Some said it was Cantarella, the Borgia's signature brew, a concoction so refined it left no trace, only corpses. Lucrezia watched it all, her expression serene. When Cesare leaned close, his breath warm against her ear, she did not flinch. "They should not have crossed us," he murmured. She sipped her wine. Number they should not have. By dawn, 6 men were dead. The official story would blame bad shellfish, a tragic accident. But Rome knew better. The whispers spread like wildfire. The Borgias had purged their enemies in plain sight, feasting as their guests choked on their last breaths. It was not the first such banquet, nor would it be the last. These poisoned feasts became legend, reinforcing the family's monstrous image. What kind of people murdered under the guise of hospitality? What kind of daughter sat calmly as men died at her table? The answer was simple. The Borgias were not like other people. They played by their own rules, and woe to those who forgot it. As the bodies were carried away, Alexander raised his glass once more, his smile genial. To health, he toasted, and the survivors, trembling, drank. The wedding had been a spectacle of silk and gold, a display of Borgia power meant to dazzle Rome. Lucrezia, barely 13, had stood before the altar in a gown of Venetian lace, her small hands clasped in those of Giovanni Sforza, Lord of Pesaro. The groom, twice her age, smiled with the confidence of a man who believed himself favored by fortune. He did not yet know his marriage was a transaction, one that would end as abruptly as it began, in whispers darker than the Tiber at midnight. The feast that followed was lavish, even by Borgia standards. Wine flowed in rivers, and the tables groaned under the weight of roasted peacocks, their feathers reattached in grotesque splendor. Lucrezia, her face a mask of practiced serenity, accepted toasts from men who eyed her like a prize. Across the hall, her father and brother watched, their expressions unreadable. When the time came for the bedding ceremony, the guests erupted into bawdy cheers. Tradition demanded the bride be escorted to the marital chamber where the marriage would be consummated under the gaze of witnesses as proof of its legitimacy. But as the crowd surged forward, Alexander raised a hand. "Enough," he said, his voice cutting through the noise. "My daughter is a child still. Let them retire in peace." The room fell silent. It was a breach of custom, a refusal to let Rome see the marriage sealed. Giovanni's face darkened, but he dared not protest. Lucretia was led away by her ladies, her steps measured, her eyes downcast. Behind closed doors, the truth of what transpired or did not would become the subject of fevered speculation. Giovanni would later claim the marriage was consummated. Lucretia, in the annulment proceedings, would insist it was not. But the annulment itself was a masterpiece of Borgia cunning. Alexander, needing to sever ties with the Sforzas as Milan's political winds shifted, declared the marriage void on grounds of non-consummation, a humiliation for Giovanni, who was forced to sign a document attesting to his own impotence. No man would admit such a thing willingly. Giovanni snarled to his allies after fleeing Rome. "They threatened me. The Pope's own son held a knife to my throat." The rumors took flight. Had Giovanni truly been impotent, as the Borgias claimed? Or had something far more sinister prevented the marriage's consummation? Whispers slithered through the streets. Had Lucretia's father or brother intervened? Had she been kept untouched for darker purposes? The Vatican's official stance was firm, the marriage was invalid, and Lucretia was free to wed again for the good of the Church. But Rome was not so easily convinced. The annulment reeked of political maneuvering, or worse, of secrets too vile to name. Lucretia, for her part, said nothing. She withdrew to the convent of San Sisto, her sudden piety raising eyebrows. Was it grief, shame, or a strategic retreat, allowing the scandal to cool before her next role in her father's ambitions? Giovanni, stripped of his bride and his pride, would spend years railing against the Borgias, his fury fueling the rumors. "They are monsters," he wrote to a fellow noble. "What kind of father annuls his daughter's marriage on such grounds, unless he has other uses for her?" The question lingered. For Lucretia, the first wedding night was not a beginning, but a prelude. A taste of the betrayals and intrigues that would define her life. And for Rome, it was proof that in the house of Borgia, even love was a weapon. The city of Rome shimmered under a veil of gold and decay, its ancient stones soaked with the scent of incense and the rot of corruption. Within the heart of the Vatican, Pope Alexander VI, born Rodrigo Borgia, sat upon the throne of saint. Peter, his predator's gaze sweeping over his domain. The papal tiara, a heavy circlet of ambition, rested upon his brow, a burden he wore with a relish that bordered on ecstasy. For years he had schemed, bribed, and clawed his way to this pinnacle, his rise fueled by Spanish gold and the whispered promises that bent cardinals to his will. Those who dared oppose him found their influence eroded or their lives snuffed out in the shadowed corridors of power. The Holy See, once a bastion of divine purity, had transformed into a den of vice where fortune shifted with the roll of dice and the sway of courtesans' hips. At the center of this opulent decay stood Lucrezia Borgia, a vision of golden hair and porcelain beauty, her presence a paradox of innocence and cunning. At just 16, she was already a pawn and a player in her father's grand design. Her laughter, light and melodic, echoed through the gilded halls of the Vatican. But beneath that delicate facade lay a mind sharpened by necessity, navigating a game she had not chosen. Beside her loomed Cesare Borgia, her brother, a young cardinal whose cold, wolf-like eyes betrayed ambitions that rivaled even their father's. Together they formed the heart of the Borgia dynasty, a family not noble by birth but ruthless by nature, their ascent a testament to their unrelenting will. The whispers began almost immediately, curling through the taverns and slipping between the lips of courtiers in the Vatican's antechambers. Rome thrived on scandal, and the Borgias provided an endless feast of intrigue. Rodrigo's mistresses paraded openly, their bastard children raised within the sacred walls, a blatant defiance of ecclesiastical norms. Cesare's reputation grew with each enemy who vanished into the night, his hands stained with the blood of rivals. And Lucrezia, sweet, innocent Lucrezia, found herself ensnared in a web of rumor and insinuation, her every move scrutinized for signs of the family's alleged depravity. The papal court had become a stage, its players reciting lines written in blood, their performances a dance of power and peril. Beyond the Vatican's walls, the city seethed. The people murmured of poison in the wine, of daggers glinting in the dark. The Borgia's enemies, the Della Roveres, the Sforzas, circled like vultures, their pamphlets and broadsheets dripping with venomous accusations. Rome had witnessed corruption before, but never so brazen, so personal. Beneath the frescoed ceilings of the Apostolic Palace, the seeds of a darker legend took root, nurtured by the family's audacity and the city's insatiable hunger for scandal. The whispers slithered through the shadows, questioning the nature of this family. What manner of lineage was this? What sins lurked behind closed doors? The stage was set, the players poised, and the world would etch the name Borgia into its memory with a mixture of awe and horror. The first rumors were like smoke, elusive, intangible, yet impossible to ignore. They drifted through the taverns of Trastevere, seeped into the ink of anonymous pamphlets left in the piazzas at dawn, and coiled around the words of courtiers in the Vatican's dimly lit halls. The daughter shares the father's bed. The brother's gaze lingers too long. No one could pinpoint the origin, but the accusations spread like a plague, fueled by the Borgia's enemies who needed no proof, only a scandal vile enough to erode their grip on power. Incest, the unforgivable sin, became the perfect weapon, a charge so monstrous it could not be uttered in polite company, yet so tantalizing it consumed the city's imagination. The pamphlets appeared overnight, their crude woodcuts depicting twisted embraces, figures vague enough to evade libel, yet unmistakable in their intent. Rodrigo's jowled face, Cesare's sharp features, Lucrezia's flowing hair, all rendered in grotesque caricature, their forms entwined in a mockery of familial bonds. The text was a venomous stew of innuendo and blasphemy. O Holy Father, who art in bed, unhallowed be thy name. These broadsheets, distributed by Sforza lackeys, found their way into the hands of nobles, merchants, and priests, each copy a dagger aimed at the Borgia heart. Lucretia, walking through the Vatican gardens with her ladies, felt the silence that fell as she approached, their eyes darting away in shame or accusation. She was no fool, she knew the rumors, but to acknowledge them would be to grant them power she could not yet wield. Cesare, ever the wolf, responded with the ferocity of a predator. He tracked down a printer in the dead of night, his dagger pressing into the man's throat until he named his patron, a Sforza agent paid to spread the filth. The printer's body was found floating in the Tiber the next morning, his tongue cut out, a grim testament to Cesare's resolve. The message was clear, but the damage was irreparable. Scandal, once unleashed, could not be silenced. It took on a life of its own, feeding on the city's darkest desires. Rodrigo, for his part, dismissed it with a wave of his ringed hand. Let the dogs bark, he told Lucrezia, his voice thick with wine. They envy what they cannot have. But his nonchalance only stoked the flames, raising questions. Why would a pope, God's vicar on earth, not rage against such slander, unless the rumors held a kernel of truth? At a banquet hosted by Cardinal Orsini, a rival faction's leader, a poet recited verses laden with double meaning, his eyes flickering toward Lucretia as he spoke of flowers plucked too soon. The room erupted in stifled laughter, a chorus of derision that pierced her composure. Lucretia, her cheeks burning, kept her chin high, but later, in the privacy of her chambers, she shattered a vase against the wall, the shards scattering like her fractured dignity. Cesare found her there, kneeling among the wreckage, and promised retribution with a voice like unsheathed steel. They will pay. Yet payment was not enough. The whispers had taken root, burrowing deep into the psyche of Rome. Incest was the ultimate taboo, a violation of nature, a corruption of bloodlines, a defiance of divine order. In a world where the church preached purity and the sanctity of family, no accusation carried greater weight. The Borgia's enemies seized upon it, amplifying their revulsion with every sermon, every pamphlet. Rome had tolerated bribery, murder, even the flaunting of mistresses, but incest was a sin so monstrous it demanded damnation. The irony was bitter. The Borgias were guilty of many sins: bribery with Spanish gold, assassinations ordered with cold calculation, marriages brokered like trade deals, but not of the charge that threatened to destroy them. Yet the truth mattered less than the story, and the story was too delicious to resist. The pamphlets grew bolder, their imagery more explicit. One, slipped under the door of a Venetian ambassador, depicted Lucretia as a modern Phryne, her arms entwined with father and brother in a blasphemous embrace. Another, read aloud in the taverns of Trastevere, spun a tale of a papal key unlocking more than heaven's gates, its verses a lewd parody of sacred hymns. The Borgia's enemies needed no evidence. The seed of doubt, nurtured by Rome's appetite for scandal, was sufficient. Even the Church's teachings fed the fire, with sermons on the sins of Sodom and the damnation of defilers twisted into veiled condemnations. A Florentine preacher, his voice trembling with fury, spoke of a house where the serpent nests in the marriage bed, his words a dagger aimed at the Borgia name. Lucrezia, trapped in the storm's eye, became both villain and victim. To some, she was the seductress, ensnaring her kin with a temptress's wiles. To others, she was the pawn, an innocent corrupted by the men who should have shielded her. Cesare the strategist saw the peril. They paint us as monsters because they cannot defeat us as rivals. Rodrigo, reclining with his wine, chuckled dismissively, but Cesare knew the truth. Words could topple empires. The Borgia's real sins, mundane in their greed and violence, paled beside the myth taking shape. A myth that would outlive them, etched in ink stained with poison, ensuring that history would remember not their deeds, but the tales spun by their enemies. The air in Rome grew thick with the weight of whispered accusations, a miasma that clung to the Vatican's gilded walls like a second skin. Cesare Borgia's promise of retribution hung heavy in the aftermath of the printer's gruesome fate, his body a silent warning bobbing in the Tiber's dark waters. Yet the silence he sought to impose only amplified the scandal, the rumors of incest taking on a life of their own, spiraling beyond the control of even the ruthless Borgia will. The city pulsed with a fevered energy, its streets alive with the rustle of pamphlets and the murmur of voices, each tale more lurid than the last. The Borgias, once merely reviled for their greed and ambition, were now cast as abominations, their name a curse whispered in the shadows of taverns and the sanctity of churches alike. Within the apostolic palace, the family fortified their position, their unity a shield against the onslaught. Pope Alexander VI, ensconced in his opulent chambers, dismissed the growing storm with a wave of his jeweled hand, his laughter a deep rumble that echoed off the frescoed ceilings. "Let the dogs bark," he repeated to Lucretia, his voice slurred with wine, his eyes gleaming with a predator's confidence. But beneath his bravado lay a calculating mind, one that recognized the danger lurking in the whispers. He summoned Cesare, his enforcer, and together they plotted their next move, their voices low as they strategized to turn the tide of public opinion. Gold, they agreed, would silence some tongues, while fear would cow the rest. Yet a strange unease gnawed at Rodrigo, a flicker of something unexplainable, a chill that crept up his spine when he gazed at the stars through the palace windows, as if unseen eyes watched from the void. Lucretia, meanwhile, bore the brunt of the scandal with a grace that masked her inner turmoil. The shattered vase in her chambers lay forgotten, its fragments a silent testament to her rage. But her public demeanor remained unyielding. She walked the Vatican gardens with her ladies, her chin held high, though their averted gazes stung like needles. The rumors painted her as a seductress, a pawn, a victim, each label a chain she could neither break nor embrace. In the quiet of her prayers, she sought solace, but even the sacred halls seemed to echo with the slander. One night, as she knelt before a candlelit altar, a shadow flickered across the wall, uncast by any flame. She turned, heart pounding, but found only silence, a silence that felt alive, as if the air itself held its breath. Was it a trick of the mind, or a sign of the mystical forces some whispered the Borgias had awakened? Cesare, ever the wolf, channeled his fury into action. His dagger had silenced one voice, but the pamphlets multiplied, their woodcuts growing bolder with each edition. He tracked the Sforza agents to a hidden print shop in the back streets of Trastevere, his men descending like a storm. The press was smashed, the printers beaten, but the damage was done. The ink had spread too far. Yet in the chaos, Cesare stumbled upon a curious find, a parchment etched with strange symbols unlike any Latin or Greek script tucked beneath the press. He pocketed it, his mind racing. Was this a weapon of his enemies or something older, something tied to the unease that plagued his father? That night, as he studied the parchment by candlelight, the flame flickered wildly, and a low hum seemed to rise from the paper, as if it carried a voice from beyond. The mystical undertone of the Borgia rise began to weave itself into the narrative. Some in Rome whispered that their power was not merely the product of gold and guile, but of a pact with darker forces. The sudden deaths of opposing cardinals, the uncanny timing of their victories, could these be mere coincidence? A gypsy fortune-teller, consulted in secret by a fearful noble, spoke of a family marked by a celestial sign, their destiny entwined with the stars. "Their blood is touched by the void," she intoned, her eyes glazing over, "and their fall will be a light that blinds." These tales, dismissed by the rational, found fertile ground among the superstitious, adding a layer of dread to the incest rumors. The Borgias, it was said, had summoned something ancient, something that now demanded its due. The family's enemies capitalized on this growing mystique. The Della Roveres, led by Cardinal Giuliano, commissioned a series of sermons that blended moral outrage with cryptic warnings. "Beware the house where shadows move without light," one priest proclaimed, his voice trembling as if he feared retribution. Pamphlets now carried not just lewd illustrations, but occult symbols, hinting at sorcery. The Sforzas, meanwhile, spread tales of a cursed relic, a golden cross said to have been stolen from a Spanish monastery and now housed in the Vatican, its power fueling the Borgias' rise. Whether truth or fabrication, these stories eroded the family's legitimacy, casting them as not just corrupt, but damned. Lucrezia, sensing the shift, sought to reclaim her narrative. She commissioned a portrait by Pinturicchio, her image rendered as a Madonna-like figure, her purity a counterpoint to the slander. Yet even this act fueled speculation. Why such a display if the rumors held no weight? Cesare, poring over the mysterious parchment, began to suspect it held a key to their defense. The symbols, he realized, resembled those he had seen in a dream, a vision of a starlit void where a voice whispered his name. Was this a weapon, a curse, or a guide? He shared his findings with Rodrigo, who ordered the parchment locked away, but not before copying its markings into a secret ledger, his curiosity piqued by the possibility of unearthly power. The tension within the family tightened. Cesare's protectiveness toward Lucrezia grew, his presence a constant shadow at her side, his cold eyes daring anyone to challenge her. Rodrigo, sensing the need for a new alliance, began negotiations with the Este family, plotting Lucrezia's next marriage as a shield against their foes. But the mystical signs persisted, candles extinguishing without wind, mirrors reflecting figures that vanished upon second glance. The Borgias, it seemed, were no longer merely players in a game of power, but pawns in a cosmic drama, their sins and scandals a prelude to a destiny written in the stars. The stage was set for a confrontation, not just with their enemies, but with the unseen forces that now stirred in the shadows of their empire. The Vatican trembled under a shroud of unseen forces, its sacred halls now a battleground where the mundane ambitions of the Borgia family clashed with the whispers of a cosmic destiny. The parchment Cesare had seized from the Trastevere print shop lay locked in a secret vault, its strange symbols etched into Rodrigo's ledger, a silent enigma that pulsed with an otherworldly energy. The family's enemies, emboldened by the growing scandal, pressed their advantage, their pamphlets now adorned with occult sigils that seemed to shift under candlelight, as if alive. The air in Rome grew heavy, charged with a tension that transcended politics, hinting at a pact forged not with gold or steel, but with the stars themselves. The Borgias, once masters of their fate, found themselves ensnared in a web they could neither see nor fully comprehend. Rodrigo Borgia, Pope Alexander VI, felt the shift most keenly. The chill that had crept up his spine beneath the starlit sky now lingered, a constant companion that gnawed at his confidence. He summoned astrologers and alchemists to the Vatican, cloaking their presence under the guise of theological consultations. One, an aged Spaniard with eyes like clouded mirrors, traced the symbols from Cesare's ledger and spoke in a voice that trembled. "These are not of this earth. They mark a covenant with the void, a bargain sealed by blood." Rodrigo dismissed the man with a purse of gold, but the words sank deep, stirring memories of a dream where a voice had promised him the papacy in exchange for a price yet unpaid. Was this the source of his unease, the price now come due? He ordered the ledger hidden deeper, yet the symbols seemed to burn into his mind, their meaning eluding him. Lucretia, meanwhile, bore the weight of the rumors with a resilience that masked her growing dread. The portrait by Pinturicchio, intended as a shield of purity, only fueled the fire, with detractors claiming it was a blasphemous mockery of the Madonna. Her nights were haunted by the shadow that had flickered across the altar, now joined by visions of a starlit void where eyes watched her every move. One evening, as she prayed, the candle before her flared without cause, casting a silhouette of a figure with outstretched arms. She gasped, her voice a whisper, "Father?" But the figure dissolved, leaving only the echo of a hum that resonated in her bones. Was this a sign of divine judgment or a call from the same force that guided her family's rise? She confided in Cesare, her brother's presence a rare comfort amidst the storm. Cesare, driven by the parchment's mystery, sought answers beyond the Vatican's walls. He enlisted a disgraced monk, Brother Thomas, known for his forbidden studies of ancient texts. In a hidden cellar beneath a ruined church, Thomas deciphered the symbols as a celestial script, a language of the stars used by a forgotten order to commune with entities beyond the firmament. "This is no weapon of your enemies," Thomas warned, his hands trembling. "It is a summons, a key to a door that should remain closed." That night, as Cesare studied the translation, the hum returned, louder, accompanied by a vision of a star exploding into 1,000 eyes. He awoke drenched in sweat, the ledger beside him scorched at the edges, as if the parchment had resisted his intrusion. The realization dawned: the Borgia's power might stem from this pact, and its enforcers now demanded their presence. The mystical currents intensified. Reports filtered into the Vatican of strange occurrences: cattle found dead with eyes burned out, skies above Rome streaked with unnatural lights. A peasant woman claimed a figure in papal robes had appeared to her, whispering of a family touched by the void. These tales, dismissed by the rationale, fueled the growing cult of fear and reverence around the Borgias. The Della Roveres and Sforzas seized the opportunity, their sermons and pamphlets now invoking exorcisms against a demonic lineage. Yet some, drawn by the mystique, began to see the family as chosen, their sins a necessary sacrifice for a greater destiny. The Golden Cross, rumored to be the source of their power, became a pilgrimage site, its theft from a Spanish monastery, now a legend of divine theft. Rodrigo, sensing the need to consolidate power, accelerated negotiations with the Este family, offering Lucretia's hand to Alfonso d'Este, Duke of Ferrara. The marriage, he hoped, would secure a northern alliance and counter the scandal's damage. But as the betrothal was sealed, a strange omen marred the celebration. The church bells rang unbidden, their peals a discordant wail that sent courtiers fleeing. Lucretia, standing beside her father, felt a cold hand brush her shoulder, though no one stood near. Cesare, clutching the scorched ledger, vowed to unravel the pact, his ambition now tinged with a fear he dared not name. The family's unity, once their strength, began to fracture under the weight of the unknown, each member grappling with the possibility that their rise had summoned forces beyond their control. The court buzzed with tension. Cardinals loyal to Rodrigo grew wary, their allegiance tested by the rumors and omens. Cesare's men reported sightings of cloaked figures trailing their movements, their faces hidden beneath hoods marked with the same symbols from the parchment. One night, a servant found a dead raven on the papal threshold, its beak stuffed with a scrap of paper bearing a single word: repay. Rodrigo ordered the incident suppressed, but the message echoed his dream, fueling his paranoia. Lucretia, seeking clarity, turned to a hidden chapel where she encountered an old nun who spoke of a prophecy. The star-blessed will rise, but their light will consume them. The nun's words, delivered with a knowing smile, left Lucretia trembling, the weight of her family's destiny pressing upon her young shoulders. The Borgias stood at a crossroads. Their enemies closed in, their allies wavered, and the mystical forces they had unwittingly unleashed grew bolder. The parchment, the omens, the visions, all pointed to a celestial pact that demanded fulfillment. Cesare resolved to confront the source, arming himself with the ledger and a resolve hardened by fear. Rodrigo, torn between denial and curiosity, began to see the papacy as a fleeting prize compared to the power hinted at in the stars. Lucretia, caught between duty and dread, prayed for guidance, her heart torn by the love for her family and the terror of their fate. The stage was set for a reckoning where the line between earthly power and cosmic destiny would blur and the Borgias would face the true cost of their ambition. The Vatican stood as a fortress besieged not by armies but by the unseen currents of a celestial pact that had begun to exact its toll. The scorched ledger, bearing the strange symbols Cesare had copied from the parchment, lay open on a table in a hidden chamber, its pages trembling as if alive with a restless energy. The omens that had plagued Rome, unbidden bell peals, dead ravens, streaking lights, now converged upon the apostolic palace, a storm of mystical forces that threatened to shatter the Borgia dynasty. Cesare, his resolve hardened by fear, prepared to confront the source of this power, his mind ablaze with the vision of a star exploding into eyes. The family's ambition, once their strength, now teetered on the edge of a chasm, their every move shadowed by the price of a bargain they had not fully understood. Rodrigo Borgia, Pope Alexander VI, felt the weight of that bargain most acutely. The chill that had haunted him now deepened into a constant tremor, his dreams filled with a voice that whispered of a debt unpaid. He summoned his astrologers once more, their faces pale as they studied the ledger's symbols under flickering torchlight. "This is no earthly script," the Spaniard reiterated, his voice cracking. "It is a summons from the void, a contract sealed with your ascension. The stars demand their due, blood or soul." Rodrigo's laughter, once a shield, faltered, replaced by a grim determination. He ordered a secret mass to be held, hoping to appease whatever force watched from above, but the incense burned black and the chalice shattered in his hands, spilling wine like blood across the altar. The pact, it seemed, could not be undone with prayer. Lucrezia, caught in the maelstrom, sought refuge in the hidden chapel where the old nun's prophecy had unsettled her. The nun was gone, but a new figure awaited, a cloaked man with eyes that glowed like embers, his voice a resonant hum. "The star-blessed must ascend or fall," he intoned, handing her a small vial filled with a shimmering liquid. "This will reveal the truth, but at a cost." Lucretia, her hands trembling, accepted it, the vial warm against her skin. That night she drank, and the world dissolved into a vision, a starlit void where her family stood, their forms wreathed in light and shadow, while a chorus of voices chanted her name. The experience left her breathless, her faith shaken, and a new resolve kindled to protect her family, even if it meant embracing the unknown. Cesare, meanwhile, embarked on his quest, accompanied by Brother Tomas and a select band of loyal men. They journeyed to an ancient ruin outside Rome, guided by the monk's translation of the celestial script. The site, a crumbling temple adorned with the same symbols, pulsed with an eerie energy, the air thick with the scent of ozone. As Cesare descended into its depths, the hum from his vision returned, growing into a roar. The chamber at the heart revealed a stone altar, its surface etched with the ledger's markings, and above it, a rift in the air, a portal to the void. From it emerged a figure, its form shifting between starlight and shadow, its eyes the same that had haunted his dreams. "The pact is fulfilled," it declared, its voice a thousand whispers. "Your blood has opened the way. Now choose, ascend, or perish." The mystical forces unleashed their fury. Back in Rome, the Vatican shook as if struck by an earthquake, its walls cracking, stained glass shattering. The golden cross, rumored to be the pact's anchor, glowed with an unnatural light, drawing pilgrims and enemies alike to its radiance. The Della Roveres and Sforzas, sensing weakness, launched a coordinated assault, their armies marching on the city, their pamphlets now calling for an exorcism of the star-cursed lineage. Yet some among the mob, awed by the cross's power, knelt in reverence, their faith in the Borgia's divine mandate unshaken. The city became a battlefield of belief, where the line between heresy and holiness blurred. Rodrigo, trapped in the papal chambers, faced his own reckoning. The black incense and shattered chalice had been omens, and now the rift's energy reached him, visions of his past sins, bribes, murders, the papacy bought with gold, flashing before his eyes. A voice from the void offered salvation. Surrender his soul, and the family would rise as celestial rulers. Torn between pride and fear, he hesitated, his hand clutching the ledger as if it held the answer. Lucretia, roused by the tremors, rushed to his side, the vial's vision guiding her. She pleaded with him to resist, her voice a lifeline amidst the chaos, but the choice weighed heavily. Cesare, at the altar, faced the figure's ultimatum. The portal pulsed, offering power beyond imagination, control over the stars themselves, but at the cost of his humanity. His men, paralyzed by the sight, looked to him for salvation. Brother Thomas, collapsing under the strain, whispered a final warning. The void takes all who enter. Cesare, gripping his dagger, chose defiance, slashing at the figure. The blade passed through, but the portal flared, casting him back, the ledger torn from his hands and consumed by the rift. The chamber collapsed, burying the temple, and Cesare emerged scarred but alive, the pact's hold weakened. In Rome, the assault faltered as the cross's light dimmed, its power drained. The Borgias, battered but unbroken, retreated to regroup. The mystical storm subsided, leaving the city in stunned silence, the ledger's loss a mystery. Lucrezia, clutching the vial, felt a new strength, while Rodrigo, shaken, began to see the papacy as a fleeting prize. Cesare, marked by his encounter, vowed to uncover the void's secrets, his ambition now tempered by a haunting awareness. The family's destiny remained entwined with the stars, the pact's reckoning a prelude to a greater trial, where their blood would either elevate them to eternity or consign them to oblivion. The dust of Rome's shaken streets settled into an uneasy quiet, the Vatican's cracked walls a testament to the celestial storm that had nearly consumed the Borgia dynasty. Cesare, scarred and resolute, emerged from the ruined temple, the weight of his encounter with the void etched into his features. The ledger, devoured by the portal's rift, had severed the direct link to the pact, but its echoes lingered. A hum in the air, a flicker in the shadows, that promised the family's destiny remained entwined with the stars. The assault by the Della Roveres and Sporus faltered as the Golden Cross's light dimmed, its mystical power drained, leaving their enemies scattered and the city divided between fear and awe. The Borgias, battered yet unbroken, retreated to the papal palace, their unity strained but their will unyielding, poised for a final stand against the forces they had unwittingly unleashed. Rodrigo Borgia, Pope Alexander VI, sat amidst the chaos of his chambers, the shattered chalice and black incense, a grim reminder of his failed attempt to appease the void. The visions of his sins, bribes, murders, the papacy bought with gold had shaken him, yet the voice's offer of celestial rule still tempted him. Lucrezia's plea, her voice a lifeline from the vial's vision, had stayed his hand, but the cost of resistance was clear. The astrologer's warning of a blood or soul debt haunted him, and as he gazed at the scorched ledger copy, a new resolve took root. He would not surrender his soul, but he would wield the pact's remnants to secure his legacy. He summoned Cesare and Lucrezia, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hands, declaring, "We will turn this curse into our crown." Lucretia, clutching the vial, felt its warmth pulse in rhythm with her heartbeat, the vision of the starlit void now a source of strength rather than dread. The cloaked man's words, "The star-blessed must ascend or fall," echoed in her mind, and she believed the vial held the key to their ascension. She shared her experience with her father and brother, proposing they use its power to confront the void's enforcers. That night, in a secret ritual beneath the Vatican, she poured the liquid into a basin, its shimmer illuminating the symbols from the ledger. The air crackled, and the figure from her vision appeared, its form shifting between starlight and shadow. "The pact is broken, but the debt remains," it intoned. "Offer your blood, and ascend as guardians of the void." Lucretia, stepping forward, pricked her finger, letting a drop fall into the basin, her act a bridge between fear and faith. Cesare, marked by his defiance at the temple, joined her, his scar a badge of his struggle. The portal's collapse had weakened the pact, but the figure's presence confirmed its persistence. He drew his dagger, slicing his palm, his blood mingling with Lucretia's in the basin. The chamber trembled as the void responded, a surge of light enveloping them. Rodrigo, watching, hesitated, then added his own blood, his ambition overriding his fear. The figure nodded, its eyes flaring. "You are bound as keepers, not rulers. The void claims its due in time." The light faded, leaving the trio transformed, their eyes reflecting a faint starlight, their presence imbued with an otherworldly aura. The pact was redefined, their blood a seal to guard the rift rather than exploit it. The consequences rippled outward. The Golden Cross, once a symbol of their cursed power, crumbled to dust, its light extinguished. The Della Roveres and Sforzas, their assault thwarted, retreated, their pamphlets silenced by the sudden calm. Rome, awed by the Vatican's resilience, began to weave new tales of a family touched by the divine, their scandals redeemed by a celestial mandate. The mystical signs ceased, the hum fading, but the Borgias carried the void's mark. Lucretia, now a beacon of quiet strength, guided the family's recovery, her marriage to Alfonso d'Este proceeding as a symbol of renewal. Cesare, his military ambitions tempered, turned his focus to protecting this new legacy, his encounters with the void shaping a more cautious strategist. Rodrigo, though shaken, embraced his role as a guardian, his papacy now a stewardship of the rift's secrets. He ordered the ledger's remnants destroyed, but the symbols lingered in his mind, a reminder of the balance they must maintain. The family's enemies dwindled, their power consolidated, yet the cost was etched in their bloodline. Each generation would bear the void's watch, their lives shortened by the pact's toll. Years later, as Rodrigo lay dying, he whispered to Lucrezia, "The stars claimed me, but you will carry the light." His death, marked by a strange luminescence, fueled the legend of a pope who bridged earth and cosmos. The Borgia legacy endured, a paradox of corruption and redemption. Rome remembered them not just for their sins, bribes, poison, ambition, but for the mystical mantle they bore. The forest near Kirjasha, where the temple had stood, became a site of pilgrimage, its ruins whispering of a family that ascended through darkness to guard the stars. Lucrezia, outliving her father and brother, retired to Ferrara, her eyes still aglow with starlight, her tale shaping a myth of sacrifice. Cesare, felled by fever, was said to have vanished into the void, his spirit joining the guardians. The Borgias, once reviled, became a legend of eternal light, their blood a bridge to the cosmos, their name a whisper in the night sky, forever bound to the reckoning of stars.